let's just get started here. Christopher was very interested to see what, he's not here tonight, but to see how our Horary charts turned out from 2 weeks ago. Does anybody remember what we predicted or how we did it?
I remember. This is Alice.
Alice, tell us.
We did it 2 ways. We did the Horary chart and predicted that the Republicans would take the Senate. And then we did a contest chart for the day of election. Mm-hmm. And on that one, predicted that the Democrats would keep the Senate.
It wasn't real clear, but yeah, I remember that difference too, Alice.
Right. Okay, that's the way I remember it. So I have both of these charts here. This one is the chart drawn for the time the question was presented to the astrologer. And that one, you see, was very easy to predict that the out of majority party would win. The home team, because the Democrats would be the left side of the chart.
Oh, that's right. They were more on the west side.
Right. So then if we look at the one for time question presented, then there's this one, which this one we did for the time, the 7 a.m. time on
4th.
November 4th. Okay, no, that's it right here, yeah. Chart drawn for the time, I put in the comments, for the time the polls open on voting day. Okay, well, here, I think we were a little ambiguous, but, Jupiter, there is 1, 2, 3, 4 planets on the right side of the chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the left side. But, the first house is ruled by Venus, and then there's Jupiter on that side. So in hindsight, we could say, well, who knows? And that's the way Christopher recalled it. He said, the Horary chart worked better. And, part of the reason, I found this often to be true, and is that the chart, the time the question is presented is a good time. For a contest chart, when you're like for a sporting event, you can usually know when the thing starts. These days, really, you don't. The early voting starts weeks before.
That's right.
And so it's not really a very good way to do it. But anyway, whatever, those are the results. So Alice Marie has posed a question. And it is, who will win the December 6th Louisiana Senate runoff? That's a big race. Now, Renee, I know you could care less about this, but as a contest chart is kind of interesting. So I drew the chart up for the time that I received the question, which was 2:49 p.m.
Sent?
Yeah, the email said 2:49 p.m.
Okay.
December 5th. So that's when I drew the chart. Okay.
What time zone is that?
Well, that's Albuquerque time zone. It's as if Alice Marie were sitting across the table asking me, I really need to know who's going to win.
The email puts it in your time zone.
Yeah, right. And the time of the email, when you look at the time of an email, it's your time.
Yeah, I never really realized that.
Yeah. But we can look at both charts. So if we look at this chart, the time I got the question, it's Mary Landrieu versus Bill Cassidy. It's the Louisiana Senate runoff. Mary Landrieu is the Democrat, Bill Cassidy is the Republican. Mary Landrieu is the incumbent. So she would be on what side of the chart?
Was she running against a second Republican who was bumped out of the race so that the runoff is between just the two of them?
That's right.
Yeah, nobody got 50%, so it has to go to a runoff.
Right, so there were 3 people, 2 Republicans, one of them only got 14%, That was the
Mhm.
that was the
Yeah, but I heard some pundits
Tea Party.
predicting that, of course, the 14% would go to Bill Cassidy.
well, of course it
Or
will.
nearly all of it, so that Mary Landrieu didn't have much of a prayer.
Right, and that's what this chart says. That pretty much most of the power, Sun, Venus, Jupiter, are all on the right side of the chart. So without trying to split hairs, and look at, that's what I'd say. But we could also do this, since there won't be any early voting or anything. We could say, well,
There's 5 planets on each side.
that's true. Right. I mean, this is kind of an easy one to guess because we already know the answer. Bill Cassidy will win. But anyway, if I redo this for December 6th, and we do it for 7 a.m., and then we in here for the country state, we'll put the
Louisiana.
right. We'll put the capital as Baton Rouge. Right.
That's right.
So we'll put. So here we go. Go chart. Now this shows a totally different picture.
Sure does.
Totally different. Here it's clearly all the planets, except for the moon and all but 3
Jupiter's
planets
still
are on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
But I would still go with the time the question was presented. And the reason is, for me, is that Horary is not like natal astrology. It really is a divinatory technique. And you can get lots of information out of it. If you guys read Course A, Zane presents questions for each department of life that come up, and you can get a really good idea of what, for contest charts, they're kind of simple. I don't usually put too much interpretation into them, but for questions that are really important to people, at the time they become clear in their mind, or that they ask the question, they can draw up a chart. You can get a lot of really good information by watching how the planets move, how they as from the time the charts, how they move in the ephemeris and make aspects to other planets. And you can see how the sequence of events will take place. So we should get some more good examples of that. Anybody want to make some comments about this?
Well, the question I have, and the reason I even posed another question about the election, are elections really contests? Because the contest chart in both that we've asked don't seem to be applicable.
Well, that's right. We didn't do these as a contest chart.
Well, this is a contest.
This we would sort of call the contest chart. I mean, this is the way they typically have in the past done elections. Horary astrologers have typically done it this way, but it doesn't much apply anymore because there's so much early voting. I mean, I haven't been to a poll in decades. I always do absentee. I always send in my thing, get my absentee ballot, vote at home, and send it back in because it's just so much easier.
Well, I'll tell you, I went to an Albuquerque poll for the first time on Tuesday. Never again. It was miserable.
Yeah, it's especially in some big cities, it's really a problem. So and plus there's early voting, not just absentee ballots, but the voting starts in most states these days weeks before Election Day.
Yeah.
It's a full moon chart.
Boy, it sure is.
That's right.
It's a real big time full moon chart.
Yes. Oh my God.
So at the time the polls open, it's a full moon. For all of you out there who don't know what's going, it's kind of interesting because there's the Democratic incumbent, then there's the Republican challenger, and then there was a third Republican Party guy who is the Tea Party candidate on the ballot, who got 14% of the vote, which everybody assumes will go to the Republican person, of course, which means it's kind of a done deal. Has anybody got any good Horary questions that they want to do?
Joan Rivers recently died, bogus death, but untimely botched procedure, that might be an interesting chart to compare natal with progressed.
Well, here's what I do. I do Joan
Oh,
Rivers
okay.
horoscope. And then you'll see that several come up. Here's astro.com, which is Astro Deans, which is the good place. But it's easy to see. Here's one at Astro Theme. And as I recall, they have quite a few charts. So she says, it says 2 a.m. June 8th, and it doesn't have a Rodden rating or anything like that. So it's June 8th, 1933, 2 a.m. Okay, then we'll go down and we'll look at Joan Rivers' Astrodeans and see what they have. So they both say June 8th, 1933, and it's considered an A chart. Oh, it came from memory, but it's right. It's A because I guess they felt like the person knew what they were talking about. We'll do Joan Rivers for June 8th, 1933, 2 a.m. Do a new chart. Okay, so Brooklyn, New York. So once again, we'll just type in Brooklyn. You don't have to do any capitalization and if you're using horoscope, you don't need to do any capitalization. You just type in the name of the city and NY, and you can hit the enter key or the tab key, and then it says, for this city there are duplicate cities, so there's more than one Brooklyn in New York. So we'll say, okay, and we'll prick the one that's Kings County, like it said, which is the asterisk. That means it's the main city. Okay, so there we are. So now we can go do a chart. So Aries rising, that doesn't surprise me much.
She's only got Moon and Saturn above the horizon.
Right. Let's just look at this, first of all. Let's do our summary. She's got 3 planets in Virgo, and her MC is in Capricorn, so she's got 4 planets in Earth signs, and then she's got Moon in Sag and Ascendant in Uranus, so she's got 3 planets in fire signs, and then she's got Saturn, and these 3 planets in the 3rd house are all in air signs, and then she's only got 1 planet in water, so she's evenly distributed between three different qualities. You can see water is very little. The rest of them, she's sort of air and earth. That she's got a Aries ascendant. So also movable and mutable are she's sort of a mix of that. So that doesn't tell us much. As far as what houses she's got planets in, she's got Uranus in the 1st house. So what does that tell us?
She was a loose cannon. Aries rising and Uranus and Aries.
Anybody else got any comments out there? Uranus and Aries?
Change.
I think she's a different kind of person. She didn't hold herself up to other people's standards.
Well, Aries is kind of a pioneer sign. She did pioneer facelifting.
And being out front about it.
Yeah. No, she was very out front about everything. She was a really interesting person and very, very funny. Mm-hmm. Now, where does the humor come from?
That's Sag Moon.
Yeah, that's Sag Moon.
Plus, don't you consider Gemini very humorous?
And Gemini, I think of as being witty.
Yeah.
So that helps a lot. And she's got Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Gemini in the 3rd house. And, I think she was a very mental person. She was a very intelligent person. Yeah. I mean, she had, and she was very quick, very witty. But, most comedians, they have to be pretty quick and witty. But I think that Sagittarius moon, gives her that, Sagittarians sort of always hit the point, even if it's painful. You know,
Right.
they always hit the mark.
Mhm.
Vicky's a good example of that. She never misses an opportunity to hit the mark. So, and then and that moon is it might be trine Uranus, so it's barely in orb of being trine to Uranus. So there is a trine there, but that's a cadent house.
Right.
It's a weak house. So the planet in the angular house will have a wider orb.
What would
Typically.
the moon in a cadent house have as an orb?
Well, I'd have to look it up.
Would it be less than 10?
Options. Aspect orbs. So for the trine, you can see for a planet in an angular house, it's 10. And if you're in a cadent house for a luminary, it's only 8.
Moon 8. Oh.
So it's slightly less. So you pick the biggest one, which is 10. In this case, it puts it barely in it. And if we look at the aspect grid,
Oh, this is a good exploration. I'm glad we're doing this.
then you can see that the moon is trine Uranus. If we look at the astrodynes, it's not a lot. It's it's within 1.3 degrees of being out of orb. I mean, it's only in orb 1.3 degrees. Anyway, what other interesting things are there? She's got a lot of planets in the 6th house. Jupiter and Mars conjunction. Jupiter-Mars conjunction in the witty sign, or at least the analytical sign of Virgo, but that could be witty too. So, and those are square her sun in the 3rd house. So, what would we say about that? Because that's pretty significant. Sun square Jupiter conjunct Mars.
Co-ruler of the 1st house is Mars. Her work was more important than her personal. What was her personal life? Was that a struggle?
Her husband committed suicide.
Well, but let's go back to what you said, Renee, that the ruler of her personality is in her 6th house. And so I think what you said is no doubt true. That
How important her work was.
Yeah.
Yeah. She kept working. She was still working in her 80s when
Yeah.
she went in for that procedure.
Yeah, she was. She worked till she was
Dead.
till she was dead. You'd see her on talk shows all the time. They'd love to have her on because she was just so sharp, so funny.
She got jettisoned by Johnny Carson. She'd been a guest on Johnny Carson lots and lots of times.
When
and
she
had hosted,
she
guest
used to
hosted.
host that.
She would
the
guest
Tonight
host for
Show.
him, and then
Right.
she was offered her own show.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson never spoke to her again.
Well,
But her show was opposite Johnny Carson's.
Yeah, it was.
She
Oh,
put
it
herself
was?
in competition with him.
yeah, she was
well,
in competition.
She was placed there. I don't know whether she.
Yes, Alice Marie. If she was in direct competition with him,
Yeah.
then
And couldn't that Mars Jupiter square sun be her getting in her own way sometimes?
sure, absolutely. And the sun, in this kind of a situation, the sun, Johnny Carson might be represented by the sun because he was the #1 talk show host, and he was a man, and he sort of mentored her to a certain extent because he had her on all the time, and then she would host his show a lot of times, just like Laura said. So, and then when they went into competition, that was the end of their relationship, which
It
kind
was
of,
painful to Joan.
yeah, that's pretty amazing that, people can be hateful like that. But, the pressures, you can't judge people because the pressures that they're under are tremendous. And you just have to say, well, that's just the way it was. And who knows what the whole story is. So we don't know the whole story. That's the main thing. But yeah, I think all of those planets in our sixth house and then square our sun. So now the sun square Mars is good for longevity of life, and the sun square Jupiter isn't, because the sun square Jupiter tends to be sometimes overindulgence, diseases that correspond to Jupiter when it's square the sun. The Mars gives the energy for longevity, so it just they overcame that, I guess, one another. But she had, I wouldn't say she had a caustic wit, but she certainly pointed out the foibles of life, to say the least.
She had a caustic wit.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't back down either.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
She wasn't always that way, but she blurted out and not back down.
The only one water sign, and Pisces being intercepted, she may have had a difficult, emotional and being receptive and sympathetic may have been a struggle for her.
Right. She wasn't very emotional. She was much more intellectual than emotional. The younger of two daughters of Russian Jewish refugees. 1965, she was too old and passed over. A week later, she was booked on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, before hosting her own late show starring Joan Rivers.
What I found is that she went into cardiac arrest on August 28th, but she did not die until September 4th.
So August 28th. Okay, let's progress her chart. Look at a progression report. Well, first of all, let's just see where everything's. MC's down in the 12th house. The Ascendant's progressed into the 4th house. Mercury's in the 5th house, close to going into the 6th house. Sun's progressed into the 6th house. Jupiter's still in the 6th house. Venus and Mars are in the 7th. Moon's in the 8th. She just had Scorpio ruling the 8th. So if we go do a progression report, and we'll just look at the heavier aspects for now. There aren't any? No. She doesn't have any heavy-duty aspects. So we had to resort to parallels and
parallel, sesqui square,
yeah. So
square. Huh.
well, she had a Mars sesqui square, ruler the 8th, sesqui square the Sun, Mars semi square Mars. If we sort based on peak, there we go. I did it.
All that Virgo is intercepted. And what they say is that that's a little bit latent, what's intercepted. Was she late? Did her career start young? Or?
Well, no, she was late in her career, because remember we just read in one of the things on Astrology that they told her that she was having trouble getting work because they told her she was over the hill, and then next thing she got this deal with Johnny Carson, found her, and boom, she was famous.
And there they all are in Virgo, intercepted.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Her MC is progressed into Pisces. When is this progression chart?
August 28th, the day she had that procedure where she went into cardiac arrest.
What kind of a procedure was it?
It shouldn't have caused what it did. She apparently swallowed her tongue or something that caused her heart to stop. But it was a throat procedure that was not supposed to be complicated, that, was a in and out that day kind of minor surgery, and her heart stopped. He opted to do a more complicated procedure than should have been done in that in and out facility.
Okay, for death, it says on August 28th, Rivers experienced serious complications and stopped breathing during a routine throat procedure at a clinic in Manhattan. She was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital and put into a medically induced coma after reportedly suffering cardiac arrest. On August 30th, she was put on life support. Anyway, I guess she died the following day, September 4th, 1:17 p.m.
This is the time of her death.
No, it's time of the procedure.
But it's close enough to the time of her death, which
Yeah,
is
the
it's just a
MC
few
still-
days later. She dies
But we don't know what the right
6
time
days
is.
later or something. Of course, she's got the Mars semi-square Mars. Anytime you're in surgery and you've got discordant aspects to Mars, which include Mars here, sesqui-square Sun, Mars semi-square Mars, and you're 80-something years old, things can happen. So, because the MC moves about a degree a year, just like the sun. In fact, it moves exactly with the sun. So, by progression. So it's
Oh, right.
4 years earlier. It would have been opposition Mars, which would have been in 2010. So if we look at she was subject of a documentary, Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, 2010. That's 2000 through
Did it say anything
2010.
about her husband's suicide? There it is, Rosenberg.
1987.
I don't think she talked about it for a while, but she ended up being quite open about, that it was devastating. And then she actually even got to a place where she could make jokes about it.
Well, here's what Wikipedia says. Wikipedia says the late show starring Joan Rivers, which she went into competition with Johnny Carson, turned out to be flecked by tragedy. When Rivers challenged Fox executives who wanted to fire her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, as the show's producer, the network fired them both. And then on May 15, 1987, 3 months later, Rosenberg commits suicide.
Wow.
Rivers blames the tragedy on his humiliation by Fox. Rivers credited the former president's wife with helping her after the 87 suicide of her second husband. Fox attempted to continue the show with a new name, The Late Show, and rotating guest hosts. So, we could, of course, go, that was May 15th, 1987.
How discordant is Venus in her chart?
Well, I'll tell you that, well, it's a little discordant. But she's got a discordant, overall, her chart's pretty discordant. She didn't have it easy.
Discordant Gemini.
Gemini is the most discordant
Yeah.
sign.
Yeah,
Wow.
Gemini's down there at the bottom.
She did have a way of leaning into discordant humor. And her Mercury and Venus are very conjunct.
I was wondering, because I can't quite see the progressions around her natal chart. Is that when her husband died?
Yeah, that's for when her
Is that
husband died.
87? Okay.
That's
Because
87.
I was looking at the ascendant, progressed ascendant opposing her moon.
Definitely in orb. Right. It's progressed ascendant's opposition her natal moon. Of course, her husband would be ruled by the seventh house, ruled by Venus. And Mars has moved into that house. And here it shows the ascendant opposition moon. That's sort of a key aspect.
Could she have blamed herself for his death? aspect. I would just
But
wonder.
if he was humiliated, that might have, pointed to him being humiliated that he was wrecking her career.
Mhm. And one more thing that I noticed, both in her progressed when she died and now in her progressed when her husband died, the progressed moon was in the 8th house in both instances.
Yeah, and Sag in both instances too.
Well, I don't see anything, if I was doing her chart for her, I was her astrologer, and I was looking at her aspects, the thing I would have pointed out, the main thing was the ascendant opposition to the moon. And I would have tried to have given her lots of possibilities for how that might express. But it certainly could be a health issue, a mental issue, that she would have had to have exercised some precaution during that time. But of course, would I have told her to be careful that her husband might commit suicide? Of course not. But
But what about a career issue?
yeah.
Did you look at it that way?
Yeah, I think a career issue. Well, anything with the moon, the moon shows up so often in celebrity charts. I mean, it's amazing how many actually have a dominant moon, because the moon seeks notoriety. That's one of its key when it's prominent. It seeks notoriety. So when there's a bad aspect of the moon, then that there's no notoriety issues have a negative impact on the life. It certainly was a very turbulent period in her life. I mean, I don't see any horrendous aspects other than that, and that one was actually perfect in September of '86. So 9 months before. 8 months before all this happened. The key event might have happened, could have easily happened 8 months earlier. So by the time it got around to, the firing of her husband as the producer,
What do you make of the 9th house moon? I find that.
I would have said she's moon and Sag in the 9th house, that she's a philosopher. You know how they say waxing philosophical?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's just past a full moon. That sun opposition her, the moon's opposition her sun, just past full, just 1 degree, less than half a degree past full. And it's interesting, that opposition, because, she's got that sun, those 3 planets in the house of mental activity opposite her philosophical moon. How would that express?
Well, I think that philosophic nature underpinned her sort of acerbic wit, that she could cut to the quick, and because she was making it funny, she could say, searing truths.
But if it's an opposition, I wonder where there's a separation between the 3rd and the 9th house. For example, when it comes to education, what kind of education did she have? How did she feel about education? How did she feel about people who had a lot of education? How did she feel about religion? She was Jewish. Was she practicing Jew?
I don't know.
Or did she find that a bunch of nonsense? As she was growing up, that was an issue for her. Of course, in one thing we read, I was reading there on the Astrology site, was that her father was into humor and promoted her, taught her how to be humorous. I don't know if that's true, but the moon rules the 4th house. That's the house of the father. Not too
I
hard.
just checked her education. She went to Barnard, I think it said, college.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
That's,
quite academic.
yeah. It's Ivy League. Okay, well, let's talk about next week. Let's talk about what we're going to do here. Next week is Christopher's going to be here. And one thing he's going to do is he's going to do the John Denver chart. You know, a good thing to do is to come up with somebody's chart that you're really interested in. And go, you know, use a Wikipedia article or just do some research on the internet and come up with key events in their life. And then, you know, we can go through and look at the key aspects, the big ones that occur in their life, and see if we can get them to line up. Another fun thing to do, and I've done this with my chart, found it fascinating, is to do your own, is to go back in your life and start from the time you can remember, 4 or 5 years old, and start listing the big things.
Oh my God, what a
Huh?
job.
It's not that hard.
I can never figure out the time frames.
Well, but you can figure out where you were, or you know you moved.
Yeah. me
My
too.
brother remembers everything, and it's fun for us to talk about growing up as kids, the things that happened. But he remembers everything. I didn't remember anything. The things that I remember were things that impacted my. If something happened that impacted my self-esteem, I remember that. If it was anything else, it was just
Great.
passing. It was just a day passing by. It was just everyday stuff. So it didn't really impact me that much. Whereas
Well, you
he,
find that when you compare memories with your brother about, you know, an occurrence that you do both remember, that
Mhm.
your versions of it are so very different.
no, our versions of it are pretty much are pretty close.
Huh.
The thing is that I'm 16 months older than he is. So there were, you know, I have a little perspective of being a little older.
Yeah.
And especially when it got old enough with our mother, because our father was killed like when we were 6. And our mother didn't date for years and years. And she was a very attractive woman, and men would come around all the time wanting to date her. And but then when she started dating, lots of interesting things happened that I was old enough to be aware of, and Mark wasn't. So I told him things about, well, you know, blah 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 blah, and he said no, and I said yes. So that, yeah. So and you know, that's really interesting, comparing memories between siblings and looking at the events, because like Vicki talks a lot about her and her sister, and they're only a year apart. She's the oldest, and then her sister Pat's the next, and they have totally different
Yeah.
perspectives on what happened. I mean, it's like night and day.
Yeah. With
It's
me
like
and
the
my
two
sister,
different
too.
families, and it's fascinating to
Are
hear
they
them.
both Leos?
And they're both Leos.
Wow.
Yeah, 12
I'm
months
just
apart.
15 months older than my sister, and our reports on things are quite different.
Yeah.
We really had a different perspective. We can agree that we were both in the same place at the same time generally. You know, it wasn't like different families, but our takes on it were sure different.
So I'll be back 2 weeks from tonight for the last class, but I would very much like everyone to try and come up with some interesting things to look at. The main reason is because in addition to managing this place, we're moving to Office 365. We're putting our member database in a cloud SQL Server database. We're getting a new server. We're changing accounting systems, which is one of the most horrendous things a business can do. And on top of that, I'm working on the horoscope program again to do progressed astrodynes, which is pretty much a black hole. And I've gotten better over the years. Now, these days, I actually do come up for air and answer email, talk to Vicki and stuff like that. But things are pretty heavy for me right now. So I'm going to look to you guys to provide some interesting stuff for us to talk about 2 weeks from now.
Emailed you about Tesla.
Yes.
Oh,
that
yes.
would be fascinating.
Wondering how.
I'd love to do that. Let's plan on doing that 2 weeks from now. Renee, get as much information on Tesla as you can. I'll try and get some. And Zane may not have had the correct chart. You have to verify that. He may have had what he had.
Wow.
He may not
I
have had.
don't want Albert's charts to be wrong, Paul.
Oh yeah, some of them are wrong.
Not according to Albert.
Oh.
Oh well, no. Oh, absolutely. There are some charts that they thought it was good data, and it turns out that it wasn't because we found out more stuff. So that's just the way it is. That's life.
Not his math or his calculations or his charts. It was his data.
The data is wrong, and he worked very hard to make sure the data was right. But things change. We learn more. But just to note that we've got Dennis Sutton's has a book that we've got on our website. There's actually 2 versions. Zane did this wonderful thing about all the decadents and peoples in their charts. But there are a few of them that are wrong because the data at the time were wrong. Not because he didn't do the chart right, but because new things were found out later on. And Dennis has... Yeah, the place they were born, the time they were born, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So Dennis has corrected those. He's really good. Dennis is in Australia. And he went and got modern people for all the 36 decadents.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that's in Course 10, the first 2 chapters on the decadents, where Zane presents like 3 people for each decadent. Dennis did that and got a whole set of people, of more modern day people. Yeah, they're just PDF ebooks. Scholars do research on famous people all the time, and they uncover lots of stuff. So I can tell you for sure that there are some charts that there's better data for now than there was back then. K. Paul Johnson has done lots of research and is coming out with a new book.
Yeah.
And in it, he talks about new things about Burgoyne. And he has a whole new theory about what happened with Thomas Burgoyne, who had changed his name from Dalton to Burgoyne and lived in the Carmel area, Northern California, and then disappeared. And then this guy named, then the Wagners, and I can't remember. Anyway, it's fascinating. There's stuff that you can dig up. Okay, guys, I gotta go. So let's stay in touch. Show up next week for Christopher, and then in 2 weeks we'll do more stuff, and I'll be sending you an email. Good night, everybody.